Guys, we have an interview from the Massive Breakdown Podcast, Part 1. This is with Associate Weapons Designer Mercules and Contract Generalist Tester Kyt Kutcha. Now, what was touched on in this podcast was weapon tuning, a QA section, and the Whetstone exotic mission. Now, I love breakdowns like these because it gives us kind of an insight into the minds of some of the developers at Bungie. If you're interested in listening to this podcast directly, down below in the description will be links to all of these things. And big shout out to Lego Flash for conducting this interview. Now, to start off with question 1, what is the biggest change of going from podcast host to working at Bungie? Now, this was a question directly at Kutcha, moving back from the community and simply knowing too much, and that it's safer to just say nothing. What's your favorite daily thing you do while working on the team? What's something you are particularly proud of that you did and accomplished while on the team? And where can I find your work in game? Now, the favorite daily thing is loading the latest version of Destiny to see what's new, sometimes twice a day, loading a new version. Now, they spent a lot of time working on deep dives in exotic missions, and their proudest achievement was pushing difficulty and add density in deep dives, essentially stating that good players would be challenged as they went further. Now, some PvE specific weapon tuning questions that were primarily focused towards Mercules. Is the PvE special meta an emerging prevalence of specials intended, and if not, will it be tuned in the future? Quote, it is not intended. In Season 22, Bungie will be correcting a bug that was introduced when primary weapons went to unlimited ammo that causes more heavy to drop when running double specials. Guys, if you don't know this by now, it's literally a strat, especially in like solo content, to run double specials, as this would result in more heavy ammo dropping. Even in the day 1 Root of Nightmares raid, I too was running double special. So yeah, it's been the meta for quite some time. Now, Bungie states that they're not directly nerfing double special, but they are keeping a tight eye on it. Double special is somewhat interesting when run with specials like Forerunner or Trace rifles that have a custom ammo economy that blends the line between primary and special. Now, the idea of players being able to run, for example, a wave frame and a fusion rifle is not what Bungie wants, stating it is not the preferred way to play in-game PvE, so they will continue to monitor how the heavy ammo changes affects the playstyle in Season 22. Now, they imagine it will not have much of an effect, so they will keep an eye on possible additional future changes. Now, what are the thoughts on the state of snipers in PvE? What is the philosophy behind them? For example, are they intended to be used against champions and majors, or more designed towards bosses? Are they underperforming in your eyes? Now, this was interesting. Bungie feels that they are in fact underperforming, but there is a reason that they are slow to move snipers upward, because they have functionality of unlimited range. If snipers become the best, they immediately invalidate a large number of other weapons and become one of the only things you need to run. However, Bungie is looking to take another pass at them post Season 22. Now, their intended purpose is primarily burst damage, so good for champions and short DPS phases, while also having the ability to deal decent sustained damage. Now, they get mentioning over and over about being careful that snipers don't get too buffed as they begin to outclass even the likes of heavy weapons. Now, I think they're also being a little too cautious because they gave glaives as an example. This is similar to how glaives and why they were tuned down. They do not want special ammo weapons outclassing heavy weapons in terms of raw available damage. At the same time, you literally killed glaives, Bungie. Come on, that cannot be the metric for how we go forward when shaping the PvE meta. In my opinion, the glaive nerfs, especially in combination with Syntheseps, was completely uncalled for, and the result is pretty much all glaives are dead now. Then they mentioned that snipers also have an effect on activity design, and that they need to make sure that players hiding far away and picking off enemies in safety is not a valid tactic unless it is specifically planned for. Essentially, they don't want to trivialize encounters, which I do get. But dude, this has been a thing with Destiny for so long. I remember way back when we had the Nexus Strike from Destiny 1. You could literally sit up top and use Icebreaker and just sit there and shoot the boss over and over. And Bungie had to implement ways to keep that from happening. They would like spawn a Minotaur behind you up there. So I get where Bungie's coming from, but at the same time, snipers do require precision. And I feel like inside of PvE, that should be rewarded. Now, what is the impetus behind making inventory size influenced by mag size? Why does this influence pattern vary by weapon type? And do you have any hints about how it works? Machine guns and linear fusion rifles seem to function on how much rounding there is on the magazine size. Also, do you have any plans to surface reserves in-game, given how consequential it is. Now, as stated, you're asking about the deep old magic here. The general idea is that inventory size was originally fixed, but with the magazine sizes being so variable, you would end up with a huge magazine size that left you with smaller fractions of a mag in inventory. This felt weird, so they changed it so that it was scaled based on your mag size, so that couldn't happen. As far as surfacing goes, they are investigating a way to see if they could do it because they understand the importance, but because it is a calculation based on calculations, it requires far more work than surfacing the other stats did. Now, are you going to buff any other legendary primary weapons in PvE? We already know about hand cannons, but what about auto rifles, pulse rifles, sidearms, etc.? Note, the hand cannon buff in Season 22 is pretty substantial. In Season 23, they are testing a 10 to 15% buff to pulse rifles for PvE damage, which if tests well, they'd like to move into the mid-Season 22 pass. Now, they believe that sidearms are actually in a good state. They're just hurt by the dangers of close-range combat, especially in high-end PvE content. But as far as damage goes, they deal a lot. Now, scout rifles will not be getting a buff anytime soon, as they have the same issue as snipers. Essentially, Bungie doesn't want you sitting in the back of the map, safely away from enemies, pecking them off from afar. Now, they want to wait and see how the hand cannon pulse rifle changes and the double special heavy ammo drop changes affect the PvE meta before looking at auto rifles. Now, there was an added note here for players who are asking for their hand cannons to one-tap red bars and Grandmaster Nightfalls at their base level. That is, no perks or damage buffs. Quote, that is never going to happen. We are not going to let hand cannons one-tap in a Grandmaster. Well, there you go, guys. Now, it was mentioned that the weapons team balances around the base sandbox. For example, hero Nightfalls and legendary campaigns. Anything below that, your weapon will feel overpowered. Anything above that, they will start to feel underpowered. Now, they do this to avoid what they call an arms race with activity design. Activity design has an idea for the preferred difficulty of the activity, and they start from the base sandbox and scale deltas and cabans up until they get there. If weapons were balanced for Grandmasters and hand cannons could one-tap red bars in them, then that content becomes much easier. So then activity design comes along, says this is too easy now, and they scale it up again. And that becomes the arms race where weapons scale up to meet in-game activities, and in-game activities scale up to outstrip weapons, and the cycle continues. And you end up in a situation where people ask to go back to Shadowkeep precision damage, but a lot of primary weapons are not dealing as much precision damage as they did in Shadowkeep, but they are also dealing substantially more body shot damage, approximately double. The sandbox has grown, and then weapons grew too. Now, Bungie mentions that they want to stop that continuous cycle, and so now they balance for the base sandbox. They do look at Grandmasters to make sure weapons don't feel out of band compared to other weapons and GMs, but the focus of their balance is the base sandbox, which is the upper middle tier difficulty activities. Now, it's pointed out that saying you don't think your weapons feel good in certain activities and content is a valid criticism, but not one that should be solved by scaling the weapons themselves up in power. Now, moving on to the PvP tuning section from Mercules here. How do you handle tuning weapons that have a standard and an adept version when the effectiveness is drastically different between the two? Now, it's stated here that the goal for adepts is to have them be maybe 5 to 10% more effective than the base weapon, not have them be significantly better than the base. A 5 out of 5 roll of the base weapon should be close to a 4 out of 5 roll on an adept. And Bungie thinks they're hitting that goal pretty well. Most of the differences that do exist come from the adept mods on specific weapons. The actual biggest difference in effectiveness between the two versions is that the average skill of players using the adept weapons is generally much higher than the average skill of players using the standard version, even though the average skill of the players using the standard version may be well above the average when compared to the population as a whole. The chart they actually showed in the Twid the other week was a chart for high skill lobbies. People who were using the standard immortal may be high skill when compared to the rest of the player base, but when they are isolated into high skill lobbies, they are on the lower edge of that specific bracket, hence the underperformance shown in that specific chart. If they had actually shown the chart of all skills, kills, the standard immortal is right on line for 0% KOE, while the Adept immortal is further elevated. They then combine those two values into a single value for immortal and graph that out to see where it lies. So they do not look at the Adept and standard versions as two different weapons for tuning purposes, but it is interesting to be able to see the split within a single weapon and then see the performance differences based on average skill. So essentially, guys, they get an average of the two. Now, is there any chance Bungie will tune former lightweight hand cannons either back to lightweights or adjust stats to reflect adaptive archetypes? They seem to really underperform. Waking Vigil, for example. Now, Bungie mentioned here that they actually already did this back in February of 2022, but the bigger issue is they have to consider the weapon source when they decide on how much to improve the stats. Waking Vigil is a destination weapon, so therefore it is not going to have as good of stats as a raid or dungeon weapon coming back. And not every weapon from every source can compete with high-end weapons. So some of the 150s that have come back as 140s fell victim to that. Generally, the easier the weapon is to acquire, the less cracked the stat packages are going to be. Also, if the stats on a weapon aren't great, that sometimes opens up the possibility of them putting really unique or strong perks on the weapon because the low stats will keep them in line. And yeah, that's honestly been Bungie's philosophy for a very, very long time. You would get a weapon that has monstrous stats, but maybe not the best trait combinations. And then another weapon that very much lacks in the stat department, but maybe it has that trait combination that's super lethal. But long story short, guys, I don't think we're getting 150 round per minute hand cannons back anytime soon. Now, speaking of lightweights, it's not a hand cannon, but I know you love your redback sidearm. Are there any new lightweight sidearms we have to look forward to? Bungie mentions that there is a new lightweight sidearm coming in Season 22 that is in the same vein as redback, but with some different stuff in the perk options. Mercules states that it has been his go-to in PvP playtests. Now, for my folks that don't know about redback, it is a vice sidearm. It's also in the lightweight archetype. And look, you either love this archetype or you just don't really care about it. A lot of people don't. I'm just saying, just being real with you, for sidearms, a lot of people just didn't really care for it. Now, what I will say is back in the day, Anonymous Autumn was a fantastic sidearm. It wasn't exactly meta, but it had its moments. Now, do you feel like optimal time to kills are where you want them to be in the current sandbox? Or would adjusting them one way or another benefit the current sandbox? I think the main thing I'm curious about right now is, quote, what is the design intent fulfillment for time to kills to be as low as they are? I don't want them to be year one high, but I feel like us being able to take some weapons down to half a second and some even faster than that is a bit much. Now, from Bungie here, there's a bit of hyperbole in that question. There aren't a ton of weapons that can kill in half a second, and if they can, it's on a conditional damage boost. That being Ravenous Beast, kill clip on 120s, adaptive pulses with radiance. This is an intentional choice. They have tried to move away from things killing that fast because they think time to kill values under 0.5 seconds do not leave enough time for players to react or understand what is happening. Yeah, guys, that's actually been the progression for quite some time. We don't have TTK values that naturally reach that level of speed anymore. Like back in the day when Last Word could reach somewhere around that 0.5 second off the base. But since then, Bungie has actually moved everything back up. And the sweet spot is somewhere around that 0.8 mark. That's kind of where they want everything to be, hence why they're going to be nerfing high impact pulse rifles and their range and their consistency, all those things. They're trying to keep you from getting that 0.67 time to kill value. Or if you are going to get it, you got to be extremely accurate. The problem with SMGs is they kind of broke that mode, especially when it came to things like Immortal. You had the ease of use there with Immortal, but at the same time, you had that fast time to kill value at like 25 meters originally. Now, they think that time to kill may be a little on the fast side, and they wouldn't be opposed to shifting some of the stuff creeping up on the 0.6s back a bit. At the same time, they need to have a pretty fast time to kill for 3 reasons. Number 1, moderately high special weapon uptime leads to a lot of insta kills. So primary weapons need to be able to kill pretty fast to deal with that. If they cannot, they would have to reduce the uptime of special weapons to compensate. That is the truth there, guys. If you want to live with a 1 second time to kill value or higher, then get ready to not have special weapons readily available. Where either going to go back to the special ammo boxes back in Destiny 1 or a return of the double primary system. Now, the second thing they mention is the presence of a lot of abilities that increase damage resistance or HP, and abilities that heal you, and that we need primary weapons to be able to output a lot of damage so those abilities do not get out of hand. Number 3, they mentioned that Destiny's movement speed is pretty fast, and yes, it has gotten faster year over year. So if primary weapons don't kill fast enough, people can escape from engagements pretty easily, and the combat loop becomes run away if you get shot first, which is not very fun. Now, Bungie did mention that all that being said, they have something coming in Season 22 for PvP called Checkmate, which is a new take on PvP with some modifications. All right, so another game mode. Now, they mentioned that it's not like D2 Year 1, but they have shifted time to kills a bit and modifying ability cooldowns by a significant amount. And that time to kills in normal PvP are between 0.6 seconds and 1 second. In Checkmates, they will be between 0.8 and 1.2, with hand cannon TTK values not changing. All right, so essentially Year 3 Destiny 1 TTK values. Now, don't kid yourself, guys. Bungie is making that change right there. They may be introducing it as a game mode, but it is for sure them testing the waters to see what people think. But I don't think they can introduce raising time to kill values without somehow dealing with special weapons. And it can be something as simple as like, yo, you only get one shot of your special weapon and that's it. Now, what is their baseline to determine, quote, yes, this weapon is perfectly balanced and every adjustment to others should trend towards this. I know that for many dedicated PvP players, that baseline should be 140 hand cannons. Bungie actually considers 140 hand cannons to be that baseline. In the current meta at the current point in time, weapons like Rose and Ace of Spades is that base. Now, they chart a slope on the kills over expected chart, and basically, if anything has higher usage and higher effectiveness than those weapons, it is a good indication it may need to be tuned down. So things like Graviton Lance, No Time to Explain, and Immortal are used as examples here. Then they caution that they look at high skill lobbies when utilizing this technique, because otherwise they would be nerfing things like Centrifuge, which is true, guys. Centrifuge is one of the most used weapons in PvP this season, and it is a fun weapon to use inside of 6v6. However, if you just went in there and nerfed it based on usage, that would literally kill the weapon, because no one in high-end comp or in trials is using Centrifuge. And Bungie mentions that Centrifuge is highly effective in the center of the skill bell curve without being too effective at the high end. Then they mentioned now that comp has ranked-based matchmaking, clarifying as long as you're within one major rank up or down from your skill, as in it purely uses your rank, they are able to do a bit more top-down balancing where they can accurately see what is problematic in ascended lobbies and then balance accordingly. They look at the main kills over expected chart showing all skill levels first to find the outliers, then go to look at the high skill KOE charts, and if something is an outlier in both places, then it is an indication that it may need to be tuned down. Now, is there a common resilience level you balance weapons for? Many weapons seem to use resilience checks to keep them in their place. Is there a go-to resilience number for that? Bungie considers base resilience to be 60, which is 192 health, that being 70 health and 122 shield. And that's about right, guys. Normally when we give TTK values, it's at that resilience level, at 60, unless we specify for max resilience guardians. Now, forgiveness checks can be anywhere on the resiliency chart, just a bonus that you are harder to kill. If the time to kill drops dramatically, adaptive pulse rifles used as an example here, it needs to be at a very low resilience level so that people can build above it if they want without much investment. Now, if time to kill increases and pushes a weapon out of the meta, that should be at higher resilience levels, because otherwise everyone hits it and the gun is just worse at base. When they change the damage on a weapon, they run damage checks at 10%, 15%, 20%, and 25% damage bonuses to see it change in its time to kill values and forgiveness in PvP. The activators for a 25% buff are generally pretty stringent, and so they are okay with it shifting weapon TTK by a good bit. For 10% bonuses that are on the high uptime activators, they do not want it to do much to a weapon's time to kill unless the weapon isn't very strong at base. Again, adaptive pulses being used as an example here. 15 to 20%, they are more case by case on how they look at them. They won't put golden tricorn on something that is already strong, where it is going to lead to a huge decrease in time to kill values because the first activator is too easy. And I would say that's pretty much what they do, guys. guys. Like take for instance, Jurassic Green. You can get golden tricorn on it and absolutely shred, but mainly at 2 stacks. As in you have to follow up with a solar neutral game ability kill. Now Bungie says that generally they are okay with players getting strong effects from stacking multiple damage perks at the same time, except in rare cases. And it was mentioned not being able to buff Gutshot Straight's damage bonus because combining it with Radiance could allow 140 round per minute hand cannons to kill in 3 body shots. Now, what metric do you use to determine what is the strongest in PvP? Bungie says that they use a bunch of metrics. There's no single metric to say something is the strongest. If they were to just use KOE, then Sweet Business would be considered the strongest weapon in PvP at the moment. But they run off of things like community feedback, playtest data, personal experience, and playing the live game. Usage is a tool they use, but far from the only tool. It is one of the lower tools comparatively, actually, but it is a metric that Bungie does acknowledge. Now, it's stated that when usage is low, weapon effectiveness is highly variable because highly skilled players using the weapon in niche builds will boost the KOE. But as more players start using the gun and the average skill of the user comes down, it should bring the performance of the gun down so that it normalizes. If it does not come down, then it is an indicator that the weapon is in fact too strong. So essentially, guys, kills over expected is a very useful metric because it grabs things out in a nice, easy to see slope, making it easy to chart a line and say, hey, this thing sees more usage than this other thing, and yet the effectiveness is way higher. Either this thing needs a buff or this other thing needs a nerf. Now, do you feel that hand cannons have been power crept in the Crucible? Bungie stated that they keep track of all the balance changes they make in a historical document so you can see where guns were a year ago compared to where they are today. In terms of actual weapons that have power crept hand cannons, it's the Immortal and Graviton Lance. Those are the 2 things that have surpassed hand cannons. The other stuff that has been changed in the last year, that being high impact scout rifles got their damage buffed by 2. Auto rifles have been buffed a number of times, but outside of the center of the bell curve, they do not appear to be treading on hand cannons. Pulse rifles have been nerfed 4 times, lowering the handling, range, nerfing aim assist, also nerfed no time to explain 3 times, and they also buff lightweight pulse rifles in their base damage by 1 and adaptive precision damage by 1, but they don't think that either lightweights or adaptives have power crept hand cannons, which I can agree with. Now, hand cannons have not been nerfed in quite some time, and they buffed 180s. SMGs have been nerfed a lot. They've nerfed the range twice, lightweight base damage, Ikelos directly, then aggressive damage, then immortal directly, then target lock. The only buffs SMGs have gotten were adaptive precision damage and precision base damage, but that was paired with a nerf to Shiora as well. Now, it was mentioned that Sidearms did get an aim assist fall off buff, but they aren't currently meta, and Forerunner didn't get that buff. But Bungie does not think hand cannons have been power crept. What they think what has happened is that the state of PvP has shifted as high skill players match each other more frequently. People are playing their lives much harder than they have in the past and are taking games more seriously, and pulse rifles mesh well with that playstyle. Pulse usage has come up even though technically most pulse rifles are weaker than they were a year ago. If you look at the top 25 most used primary weapons in high skill PvP lobbies from the last 2 weeks, hand cannons make up about 70% of all primary weapon kills in those lobbies. Dude, I can believe it. Now, the stats from the top 25 weapons. The most effective primary weapon in high skill lobbies over the last 2 weeks has been spare rations. Dude, that is mind-blowing. Now, 5 of the top 10 most effective primary weapons were hand cannons, spare rations, ace of spades, rose, round robin, and hawkmoon. Yeah, it's pretty much what I run into all the time. Adept Immortal is the 7th most effective primary weapon in high skill lobbies, although it is the most used. Historically, Immortal is not even in the top 10 for most unbalanced primary weapons. Hard Light once got 30% of all weapon kills by itself, and there was a period of time where hand cannons alone have more kills than every other primary weapon combined in PvP. If you added just fell winners to the hand cannon numbers, they have more kills than all other weapons combined in PvP. DMD had less than half the usage of Immortal and was getting the same number of kills. Dude, that is wild. That kind of puts everything in perspective, right? Now, Immortal's biggest sin currently is usage. Almost all SMG usage is consolidated in Immortal, and so it feels oppressive and overused. But it was mentioned here that there are only 3 SMGs in the top 25 primary weapons in high skill lobbies, including Immortal and Immortal Adept. Comparatively, there are 9 hand cannons. Hand cannons only see slightly less usage than pulse rifles. And cumulatively, they are also the most effective class of primary weapon at high skill. But because their usage is spread out across a large number of weapons, it doesn't embed itself in your brain the same way Immortal does. That's actually true, guys. There's more variety in how many hand cannons are pooping on you. Whereas when it comes to SMGs, especially in that top slot, you pretty much only have Immortal. In the top 50 primary weapons, there are 17 hand cannons, 12 pulse rifles, 7 SMGs after Merc clarified later on, 5 auto rifles, 6 scout rifles, 3 sidearms, and 1 bow. I wonder what that would be. Now, they have said that the best primary meta is hand cannons at the top. Pulses right underneath, then ARs and SMGs, then scouts below that, as they don't really want an AR or scout rifle meta. And that is kind of where things are at. It just takes a little bit for perception to catch up to reality. You know, it's funny because every now and then Bungie gets a harebrained idea. They're like, yo, let's just amp auto rifles. And then suddenly we're in a Gnawing Hunger hardline meta or Uriel's Gift meta. Now, Bungie continues, this is not to say they think Immortal is fine. Where it is, they don't think that, but the Season 22 change directly affects Immortal by nerfing its zoom with rangefinder. The changes also affect Shiora, which is data-wise, and in Merc's opinion, the most effective SMG. Now, can we get a meta shift to underperforming weapons? I'd love to see 180 round per minute hand cannons and 360 auto rifles, as well as glaives, be the close range special meta. Now, from Merc directly, all of these weapons are getting buffed in either Season 22 or Season 23. 180 round per minute hand cannons are benefiting a lot from the range and zoom changes, and 360 ARs that aren't at the 19 and 20 zoom are also benefiting. Now, they do not want a 360 AR meta because in order for ARs to compete at the highest level of gameplay, they have to kill much faster than other options that can peek shoot, like they did with 600 round per minute ARs when they were meta. Now, 180 hand cannons are hard to tune because you can really only kill in 0.67 seconds or 1 second. That's true. Like if you tune the damage up enough for them to 3-tap, boom, now you're killing in 0.67. So they try not to tune rate of fire on weapons because very small changes have a very big difference. For example, the difference between 600 and 450 round per minute ARs is only a single frame at 30 frames per second. And the difference between a 600 and a 720 round per minute auto is only 1 frame every other shot. So tuning rate of fire can make a gun feel very good or very bad. So they usually do it on perks that are temporary. Now, they mentioned they do not want glaives to be the close range meta. They're getting a big overhaul in Season 23, increasing their projectile speed significantly. And they're looking at letting shield charge recharge slowly when the glaive is held. And they're looking at reducing the delay after firing before you can melee. But they're also going to be tuning down the shield and its damage resistance in PvP to prevent it from becoming oppressive if the uptime comes up. But they do want glaives to feel better to use, but not feel bad to play against. All right? How about we just buff them inside of PvE? Come on. Now, the question came up, how do you feel about fusion rifles and their place in the Crucible? Will the zoom changes put fusion rifles more in line with how zoom works on other weapons? Or will it only change how damage fall off distance relates to zoom? Now, as stated here at the high end, they think fusions are too strong in PvP, in large part due to the couple of perks they're going to be addressing. Fusions are one of the rare archetypes where they are almost perfectly balanced across subfamilies. There is near equivalent usage and effectiveness among rapid fires, adaptives, precisions, and high impacts. Their usage has come down a good bit though, from where they were in the past, but they're going to be nerfing under pressure in Season 22 and reducing the maximum accuracy bonus that it can grant. I do agree it is probably the best perk you can have on a fusion, considering it's always procced given our ammo economy inside of PvP. Now, they also mentioned that either in Season 23 or in Season 22's mid-season patch, they're going to bring kickstart down a bit. Now, fusion rifles in the live game have a custom modifier that substantially reduces the benefits provided by zoom, which includes damage fall off distance, aim assist fall off distance, stability, and accuracy. In Season 22, they removed this custom tuning and set the damage fall off to be slightly lower than where it is in the live game. So it is a small damage fall off nerf and a buff to other effects. And that is what led to the under pressure change. What this means is that in Season 22, a fusion with under pressure will feel slightly worse than it does right now. But any fusion without under pressure will feel better than they currently do. So they squeezed the top edge down and lifted up the lower fusions that didn't see play because they couldn't roll under pressure. All right, well, there you go, guys. Get ready to roll firmly planted. Now, will Cloudstrike be looked at, or is it in an acceptable spot? In Season 22, they are going to be reducing the radius around the player who gets headshot. They're going to go from 5 meters to around 3 meters. There you go, fellas. Better pour one out for Cloudstrike. Those multi-kills won't be freebies anymore. Now, with balancing legendary weapons, do you individually tune weapons with stats outside of the listed stats we see in game? For example, if 2 weapons in the same archetype have the exact same range, stability, aim assist, handling, and recoil direction, are there other stats in the background making each legendary weapon feel different? Now, for Bungie here, there are sometimes, but it's not something they do intentionally. And they mention they don't want there to be an invisible stat that determines if a weapon is better or not. They want you to be able to do a head-to-head comparison and have those be accurate. Iglos SMG was an example of one that had it, and it was removed. Now, one thing that is custom tuned are the sights, optics, and scopes of weapons. If those are unique, they are made by hand. So things like depth of field, blur, sight picture, size of the sights, etc. There is a difference in feel there, but it shouldn't directly affect performance. Examples of some players not liking things like the bygone sights, while other players loved it, or people that don't like Sura's hand cannons. And that is true, guys. That's why we review weapons. There's those subjectives, those intangibles that really makes all the difference in our reviews, right? Like, I'll just be like, guys, I know stat-wise, it looks like crap. It should be crap, but it feels great. I can't explain it. Now, another thing is that weapons have different recoil patterns. Different subfamilies can have different recoil patterns. For example, lightweight hand cannons recoil differently than aggressive hand cannons, but all aggressives should recoil the same. Some exotics have lots of custom tuning though. Now, what are the plans for bows coming in Season 22? There was an issue where the projectiles for bows did not have fast enough velocity to be registered as hit scan at longer ranges, which was leading to this weird hit registration, especially on lightweights. So they increased the projectile velocity of precision bows, so they should remain hit scan at longer distances, and then match the projectile velocity of lightweights up to precisions. Therefore, lightweights should see a massive improvement. Now, community members noticed that the bow reload perks stopped being effective above a certain level. They investigated and found that there was a lock on the animation preventing it from running faster than a certain limit, reducing that limit so perks will continue to have an effect. That reminds me of when we used to have issues with recoil, right? Like, you may have things mitigating your recoil of your weapon, but the animation wouldn't cancel. And if I remember correctly, that was like a change back in Shadowkey. Well, guys, that is your breakdown of that podcast. Again, if you're interested and going to listen to it directly, please do. Links to that down below. Big shout out to Lego Flash and this interview, and also to Mercules Kyt Kutcha for being there and taking all of these questions. Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.